welcome to UT-ITE seminar series. Our speaker today is Ahmadreza Imani. He's a postdoctoral fellow here at UT Engineering. And so today he's going to talk about passive data for transportation validation. So please join me in welcoming the presenter.
Thank you, Laura. So the title is Passive Data for Transportation Modeling, and I decided to choose that to have an overview of the passive data, but the main purpose of the study is to impute mode and purpose information from cell phone traces. And our case study is in Montevideo, Uruguay, in South America. So it was one of the most interesting projects that I worked, and I think one of the reasons that I was able to collaborate with many wonderful people from our group, James, Bilal, and Eric, and also the project was funded by CAF, the Development Bank of South America, as a part of the ICT South project. So I should also acknowledge their support and help before I start the presentation. And also people from Antel, which is the biggest telecommunication company in Montevideo, and something like Rogers or Bell in Canada. And so people from Antel and also people from Intendencia de Montevideo, the transportation services of the government of Montevideo in Uruguay. So what is the passive data? It's kind of data that the respondents don't need to actively participate and report their information. So as opposed to our typical household travel survey that we call respondents to ask them for their information, what type of trips they made, the passive data don't need that active participation. And typically in nature, they present the revealed preference and not the stated preference. Examples of these are different. We have credit card information, Bluetooth information. In transportation, the two main things that are currently available are the public transit, the smart card transaction, and the cellular network data. So we all know about the public transit smart card transaction, the Crystal card, for example, in Canada, but let's discuss more about the cellular network data. So what is the cellular network data? Our phones, even if they are not smartphones, they are connected to a cell tower to receive information that we have the network coverage. So using a triangulation, we can get the location of the phone from the three towers based on the strength of the network. So when we have the location of the phone, when the phone is moving across the network of the tower, we can have the movement of that phone in the network of the cell phone towers. So based on that, we can get the time-space trace of the movements. There are three major connections between the cell phone to the tower. One is the handover, one is call detail record, and one is the location of it. Handover and call detail reports are mostly the communication events, such as when you call by your phone or you send a SMS or receive a data, so that your phone is connected to the cell tower. Also, when you are moving around the network, the location update inform the network that your phone is not connected to a new cell tower. So based on those, we can get the traces of movement of the cell phones, and then infer the movement of people carrying those cell phones. So there are advantages and disadvantages with this data. The main advantage is that we can use the existing infrastructure. There's no need to install a new antenna, new station, new tower. The data is already being collected. So the cost is minimal for that purpose. Also, we have a large sample and large coverage. So basically, every cell phone can be our sample. And with the current market penetration of the cell phones, we can say that every person has a cell phone now. And we don't rely on a smartphone here. It's any kind of cell phone. So we don't need to install an app or something else. So, and also we can get a long time period coverage of the data. Because the data is continuously collected, and there is no need to do the survey every 5 years like the TTS, we can have longitudinal data. Another advantage is that there is no interaction with the user. Sometimes even the user don't recognize that their data is being collected. It is good because there is no burden on the user, but it's also a disadvantage because we don't have any individual information. We don't know socioeconomic attributes. We don't know the household structure. We don't even know that if the person has 2 phones, 3 phones, or 4 phones. So if the person carries 3 phones, we are double counting that person. So there is an issue of multiple counting of person carrying several phones. And another important disadvantage of this kind of data are the lack of spatial precision. We don't have XY coordinates of the tree because the locations we are getting are dependent on the size of the coverage of the cell towers. So the lack of spatial precision is important, and I'm going to talk about that in my presentation. So there are earlier studies on cellular data. We are not the first one that are looking at this kind of data. So there are studies that look to identify mobility patterns around using these cellular data. What is the temporal pattern? What is the spatial pattern? And so how we can identify traits, how we can identify activities. And then if we have several days of data, we can also identify meaningful locations. So there are studies that look at how to identify home locations, how to identify work and school location using this kind of data. So when we identify traits, we can also generate OD matrices. So there are studies that use the cellular network data to estimate OD matrices with different time period of the day, or weekday or weekend matrices. And there are also other studies that use those OD estimations to estimate traffic flows. OD estimations can give you the demand, and you can assign those to your road network. There are studies that use those estimations to optimize the public transport network. And also when we identify home and location, there are studies that could use those home and location to use the OD matrices for an activity-based demand model. So what we want to do in this study, we want to first identify trips and activities, and then because we have multiple days of data, we can also identify home and work locations. So the third objective, that is the primary objective and something new that we are contributing to the literature here, is to impute mode of travel from these kind of data. So the case study is in Montevideo. Montevideo is the capital of Uruguay in South America, with a population of 1.38 million. And the metropolitan has 2 million population, which is about 60% of the country's population. In terms of size, you can see that it's similar in terms of size compared to Toronto area, Greater Toronto area. And in Montevideo, this is the downtown area, this is the boundary of city, and this is the metropolitan area. So in our case studies about the metropolitan area in Montevideo. So we have different types of data sets. We have the 2016 Montevideo Household Mobility Survey, which is the typical household travel survey, the same as the TTS in Toronto. We have the road and transit network data. We have census data, and we have a very large sample of data from cell phone traces. We got a random sample of 40% random sample of cell phone users for 4 weeks in May 2018. And for that, the same period, we also got the whole public transit fare transaction from the municipality in Montevideo. So we want to use all of these data to impute home and work locations and mode of travel. So starting with the household travel survey, it is a very small survey. It's only 0.34% of the households in the region. So it's a very small sample, but it is in details in terms of information, the trips and the mode of travel. So in total, it is about 12,000 reported trips in the data set. And if you look at the mode of travel, the bus is the only mode of transit. They don't have subways or regional rail train system. So they are about 25% of the trips are made by transit, and a majority are made by walk and bike, the active mode of transit. And the auto is about 30% of the trips. The network data, in the left you can see the road network which we got from OpenStreetMap, and on the right is the bus network that we got from the Open Data Portal of Montevideo government. And we input both of these data and coded them in any network packet. From census, we got population, home, and jobs at census level, segment level. And census segment level are the smallest spatial unit of the segment, so something like the decimation area in Canada. So from those, we got population, home, and jobs. And we use this information when we want to validate our algorithm when we are identifying home and work location from cell phone terraces. So in terms of Antel data, Antel is the primary cellular telecommunication company in Norway, and we got 40% random sample of cell phones and traces for 4 weeks of data, for 4 weeks in May 2018. The raw data was processed by Antel to eliminate noises and also to preserve user anonymity. And then they spatially aggregated to 135 zones in Montevideo region, and the traces are reported in minutes. In total, we got about 117 million records for cell phone traces for about 950,000 unique cell phones. So the challenge about the data, especially in terms of spatial precision. So first, at the initial work, we got 74 zones from Antel. And if we look at the transportation models in Montevideo, the TAZ system has 186 zones. So we want to have similar zones because we want to use the cellular data for transportation planning purposes. So we negotiated with them and we gave them the TAZ map. So they said they tried to come up with the TAZ maps based on their data. So they couldn't get us the 186 TAZs, but they come up with 135 zones, which is a lot better than 74. And the reason for not getting 186 is because some of the TAZs were very small. They had to merge them together to get a bigger zone. So we have very small zones in the downtown area, and then larger zone in the suburb, and very large zones in the rural area of the Montevideo. So now we need to define activities from the cell phone tracing. We assume that anytime a cell phone user stays more than 30 minutes in a zone is due to an activity. And we tested that in the initial analysis and also looking at the literature and see that this is a common thing to do and it provides good results. But also it was not the purpose of the work. The purpose was to impute mode and purposes. So getting the activities, then we assume that between any activities there should be a trip. So the trips are defined for any activity that the first activity is the origin of the trip and the second activity is the destination of the trip. So let's show it in an example. For example, for this user, we can see that he or she was staying at zone 221 until 7:45 in the morning. And then we can see him at 8 at this zone, and then 229, and from 8:30 to noon at zone 280. Then we see him at zone 212 for about an hour, and again back to zone 280. And then until 6:30 p.m., then he moves to zone 236 and 30, and then return to zone 2021 and stays there until the end of the night. So we define the activities based on this pattern. So we have the first activity, we have the second activity, third activity, and so on. We have multiple data, so we are looking at those and seeing that, okay, that person always starts at zone 2021 in the day and then return to zone 2021 at the night. So we are estimating that that zone should be the home location. And then when we look at the different days, we also see that zone 280 is the zone that the person mostly be going there every weekday of the day. So we assume that that zone is the work location. And probably that activity around noon was like going out for a work-related matter or going out for lunch, and we label that as another activity. So we have the activities, and between each of these activities, we generate a trip. The first trip from home to work was from zone 2021 to 280 and traveled through zone 230 and 2029. The second trip from work to the other was a shorter trip, and because the zone 280 and 212 are adjacent zones. So we don't see the person in another zone in between. And again, coming back from work to home, we see that the person traveled from zone 236 and 230 and reach again to zone 22. So as this was an example, but we did that for the entire cell phone traces and generated trips from that data. We remove some of the inconsistent trips, but we get we plot the trips based on the time of the day for the entire 4 weeks. And we can see that the pattern during the day makes sense. We have the PM peaks, we have the AM peaks not as high as the PM. We have a small noon peak. And then if we look at the 4 weeks of the data, we can see the pattern for weekdays and weekends. We have 3 days of weekdays, then 2 days of weekend, 5 days of weekdays, 2 days of weekend. And here on Monday 21, we see that the patterns are different for that day. And when we look at we asked them, it was a national holiday on May 21, and it was expected that they have a different pattern. So now we are going to compare our trips with the travel survey trips. So, when we map them, when we plot them around the day, we can see that the travel survey is more peaky. So there might be, because that was, and our data is very more smooth during the day. And one reason can be the travel survey was very small sample and for one day. So we are getting an average of 4 weeks of the data for a large sample. That can be one reason. Another reason might be that the travel survey was a reported database. So there might be some missing midday trip that would affect that distribution of the trips. But in any case, we are under predicting the trips in the AM peak, which we are still working on to find out why, and also it will result in and affect all of our results that under-reporting in the AM. So to identify home location, as I mentioned, it is possible to identify the location and primary location of the user. And we tried different algorithms based on the literature and the ideas that we had. We assigned a zone as a home for a cell phone user if that zone is the most state duration or for the most state during a specific time period. Also, we tested that if the zone with the most first trips of the day and last trips of the day can be assigned as home. Also, the home as the zone with the most trips in the day. We compared all of these with at the aggregate level to the census level. And we found out that the most state duration during weekends provide the best fit to the census data. But for that, we are missing about 30% of the users because for those we couldn't clearly identify location for home using that algorithm because, for example, we don't have any traces for them during the weekends. So for those, we assign home as with the algorithm of most state duration, which provide for the entire sample. Similarly, for the work location, we can identify the second most frequent location as work location. It's not necessarily work location, it can be a school location for the students, or even if a person goes every day to a park, stay there for like 8 hours and then come back, that location would be a work location in our case. So looking at different algorithms, we find at the end we use the most state duration during daytime, during weekdays, with a minimum of 1 hour stay. And we have that minimum 1 hour stay threshold to not account for the locations that are frequently visited, but for short duration. Like if I go every day to cup of coffee from a coffee shop, we want to not account for those durations. So this way we identify 66% of the cell phone users, and we assign a work location for those people. Now, we have home location, we have work location. Now we can look at the home-based trips and work-based trips. We can see that, again, we are underreporting for AMPs, but the rest of the day looks good. Also, for the destinations, we have a similar pattern than compared to the travel survey. So, in overall, everything looks good except the AMP for the
Yeah, can you describe a little bit about the accesses?
This is hours in a day.
Okay.
This is 24 hours, and this is the frequency of the trips.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So we have more trips destined to home location in the evening, which is expected. Similarly, if you look at the work locations during the day, we have origin as a work, we have most of the trips coming back home from work in the PM, and destination work, we are again missing some of the trips here, but overall the trends are very good. They make sense and they're reasonable. So now we can also look at the home work trips. These are not tours, these are trips from home to work. So for trips from work to home, the patterns are very similar comparing our Untitled cell phone traces and the travel survey. For trips from home to work, for all day it looks good except that AMP again. And we check that it's not because of our home or work location identification problem, it's because of the missing trips in the AM from the beginning. So now if we map them spatially, we can see that the patterns are very similar to the pattern of the census data. Just one thing is that we are looking at 40% of the sample of the cell phone traces from the Antel, and Antel has about 60% of the market in Montevideo. So it's not the entire population, but still we get the similar spatial distribution compared to the census. We get the downtown area here, and the rural area. Similarly to the job density, we can, looking at the job density along the metropolitan area, again we get the same spatial distribution and compared to the census. And just one thing is, again, these are not exactly work and school location. These are the second primary location for each user. But we label them as work location. The other data set that we have is the transit data. So for the same period of the time in May 2018, we got the entire transactions from the government of Montevideo, the transportation services there, and the point is that we got both smart card and also cash payments. The problem with the system, it's not a problem, but the problem with the data is that it's only tap-on system. So the destination of the trip needs to be estimated. And if you remember last year, work of Catalina was on that data set looking at that, and now the government agency there, they used some similar type of algorithm to estimate the destination themselves. So they come up with the destinations for 62% of the data set, and they give it to us. So we are not estimating destination in this project. We are using the estimated destinations from that. So we got about nearly 30 million record of transactions, and from about 730,000 unique smart cards. So again, if we look at transactions during the day, during the 4 weeks of data, we get a similar pattern. We can see that the national holiday day on May 21, still here, it shows itself. Now, we can identify locations for the transit data too, because we have 4 weeks of the data. This time we don't have the zones, we have the stops. These are bus stops that we have. But if we look at the pattern of the usage for a person, we can identify location. We have tested different methods, but at the end we use the assumption that the first transaction of the day is usually made near home location. So that stop is assigned the home location. But to have that, we need to have, we had a threshold of minimum trips originated from the stops, because we, like for example, for 7.6% of the users, we had only 1 or 2 transactions in that 4 weeks. Similarly, for the work location, we got the last trip of the day and the minimum 3 transactions. So overall, we got 76% of the smart card have assigned a home zone, and 65% have assigned a work zone. And if we look at the pattern again during the day, we have a similar pattern, which is expected. We have more people originating from home in the AM and then returning home in the afternoon, the same for the work location. And if we map them, again, it resembles the census data for both home and job density. And if we plot both the smart card transaction data and our estimated trips from cell phone data to check with because the smart card trips are accurate, it's for the entire transit trip in Montevideo, but our cell phone data are estimated, and we can see that the frequency again during the day for the 4 weeks of data, they are similar. So our estimation of the trips are not very far off. So it's okay, the main objective of the project, we want to impute travel mode now from these cell phone traces. We identified trips, we identified home and work location. Now we need to identify travel mode. We want to use a neural network model. We have a huge data set, we can use that. But the problem with that is if we need a training data set. We need a data set like like cell phone traces, that we know the mode of the trips for those trips, and we don't have that. So the idea is to convert the trips from the household travel survey to pseudo cell phone traces. For the trips from household travel survey, we know the mode, but they don't look like a cell phone traces trip. So for those, we generate pseudo traces because we know the origin, we know the destination, we know the time of the day, we know the mode. So we generate those artificial traces, and we know the mode from the survey. So we train the neural net on those pseudo traces and generate a classifier that we can then apply to the cell phone traces and estimate the mode of the trip. So first we need to model the road and transit network system in Montevideo, then create the artificial traces, train the classifier on those artificial traces, and then execute the classifier on the cell phone traces, and finally we are validating our result. So we created the network based on those networks that we had. We imported them in the ME, and we use some of the parameters from the GTA model in Toronto, but generally we check that we don't have any major problems in the transit system, manually check every link of the network, so everything looks good. Then we assign the demand from the household travel survey and assign those to the network. So all trips of a person are loaded. For each trip, then we generate the distance that travels from the until zone boundary in each 5-minute beam. And we did that for both road trips, transit trips, and active mode trips. So, for the input of the neural network, we generated, for each trip of a person, we generated 5 minutes beams during the day, and the distance that traveled from the boundary of the until zones, the zones in that 5 minutes. So because it's the 5 minutes, you also get the speed of the trip this way. And then for each of these, we have a 0-1 active parameter. If it is belong to a trip, it is 1. If it's not, it's 0. So we train the neural network on these traces, artificial traces. We divided the artificial traces into samples, one for training, one for validation. So on the training data set, we got about 0.98 accuracy, which is very good, but it was also expected if we get a good neural network model. On the validation, on the testing, the accuracy got about 87%. So we know that our neural net works well on our artificial traces. So we are assuming that when we apply that on the cell phone traces, we are getting reasonable mode estimation. Then we apply Then we apply those on the cell phone traces. We map them based on the origin of the trips and look at the spatial patterns. For auto share, for the car mode, we have higher share of the trips in the rural area as expected than the suburb, and we have fewer trips in the downtown area pursuing by car. And the opposite is true for the transit. Transit is the big corridor here in the downtown, it has the highest mode share there, and then we have lower transit mode share in the suburb, and then in the rural area. And similar pattern also for the active mode share. Okay. Now, if we look at those mode share during the time of the day, so these are for car mode share. So we can see that the patterns make sense. For example, during the overnight period, almost everywhere there, because of the lack of the transit system, the mode share of the cars are increasing. And during AM, PM, and AM, midday, PM, the mode shares are lower than the other time period. For the transit, we have the opposite. We have the highest share during the AM period, then it drops during the midday, PM, and then we have few trips during the overnight. And similar patterns are for the active mode. It is consistent during the day with higher usage during the evening period, which is expected for the active mode of transit. Now, let's see some numbers. If we validate our results with the aggregate numbers compared to the household travel survey, the mode share for the household travel survey for auto was around 36%, we got about 35%, which shows that the estimation for auto mode share is very good. But when being compared to transit and active to the household travel survey, we see that we are over-predicting the transit and under-predicting the active mode. So there is a confusion between transit and active mode of transportation in our estimation, which is expected because it's difficult to distinguish between those than to compare to the auto to the other trips. Now, if we look at the observed mode share by origin zone versus our prediction compared using the data set to the travel survey, and we get a mean absolute error of 0.16 for auto and transit and about 0.1 for active mode. So overall, the spatial pattern looks similar to the household travel survey. So we are not off in some places, so the overall pattern looks similar. Now, if we look at the mode share prediction by time of the day, we can see that we are over-predicting transit in some cases, especially during the day here. And also, we are over-predicting the auto mode share overnight compared to the trips reported by the household travel survey. But the overall pattern again looks reasonable and good compared to the two of the data set. Looking at the mode share and comparing the frequency of mode shares based on the distance of the trips, we can see that we are over-predicting short trips for transit and under-predicting short trips for the active mode. And this is the confusion between the transit and active prediction in our model, mostly coming from the short trips. And for those, it is very difficult to distinguish between the short trip for active and transit. So it is expected, but overall we are doing very good distinguishing between auto trips and non-auto trips. So we have another data set. We have the transit smart card boarding. So we can also compare our prediction of transit from cell phone traces to the smart card boardings. And if we look at the pattern again for during the day, we can see that the overall pattern of transit boardings are very similar to the overall patterns of our prediction. And we can expand our prediction because we only have 40% of the sample from cell phone traces, and the antenna would have 60% of the market. So we need to expand to have the entire population. So if we just multiply those and expand our prediction, we can see that the pattern looks very similar. We are still over-predicting to the overall usage of the transit system in Montevideo, but we are also using a very simple expansion factor. So both of those can generate these higher frequency of transit trips down there. But again, the pattern looks similar to during the day, to the data from the transit card. Now we can map those two And if we compare the cell phone traces to the smart card boarding during different time periods, we can see that, again, the spatial patterns are very similar. So the prediction that we are making are reasonable both spatially and temporally, but we are over predicting for the transit for the entire region. So the conclusions. First of all, we showed that it is possible to create OD trick matrices for similar zones like traffic zone level, traffic analysis zones like TACs from both cell phone traces and smart card data. Then we showed that the trick mode can be inferred from the cell phone traces using the other type of the data, such as household travel survey. This is the first of a kind result, and we showed that the classifier works well for auto and versus non-auto tricks. There are still confusion between transit and active mode that we are working on that to improve our prediction, but overall the performance was good. We have identified home and work locations, and we showed that providing that the records are available for multiple days, it is possible to have good estimate of the home and work location from passive data. So there are some limitations in the study, and that one is the confusion between active tricks and transit tricks. So we are working on that now currently, and we are trying to add the smart card data to our analysis. So we expect that by adding that, we improve our transit trick classification, especially for the short trips. Then we are also trying to do a neural network on the home location, work location. So that our algorithm could identify with a very, very high confidence for about 25% of the users, the home location and work location. So for the rest, we had predicted, but the confidence for those 25% of the users are very high. So we can use that as a labeled training data set and do a neural network on those to predict and estimate the home location, work location for the rest of the days. Also, for the further analysis, we should recognize that we have different data sets, and all of these data sets have their own limitation and sampling errors. For example, the household travel survey is detailed and precise, but it is reported for very small sample of group population, and also people may underreport their short or non-home-based trips. That we all know the problems of these kind of data sets. For the cell phone traces, maybe not all people have a cell phone, or we are also double counting some people that have 2 or more phones. And the smart card data set, because the system is tap on only, and the destinations that we use are inferred. So for the next step, we want to use all of these data sets to come up with a transportation and planning framework for multi-video. So we need to be careful to account for all of these sampling biases that they have, and also be careful to not double count trips that are in the transit boarding and also in the cell phone traces. So we should come up with a solution for those kind of trips. Thank you. That was my presentation. Any questions?
The zones that you got from the cell phone company, were they actually able to match it to your traffic and alpha zones? I know they sometimes say, you have to have a zone around the cell phone tower. How are they able to now reshape it?
Not 100%, but they try to have the similar zone. Then maybe it's because their zoning system were similar that they were able to do that, but again, for the small zones, no, but they try to, even if they have a bigger zone, they try to have like a combination of the small zones within that bigger zone. So we know that the 3 TACs were merged together to get.
Yeah, it's also difficult in terms of how do you now take the results that you get from cell phone ODN if you want to, for example, fuse it rather than just comparing against the household trials that we data. How
Yes.
would you have any ideas?
There are ways, but all of them are approximations, right? There's no way that we can say for 100% that, because the boundaries are different. But if the boundaries are like similar 90%, we can say that, okay, these 3 are that covered, right? It depends on the threshold. But overall, the accuracy were high comparing the boundaries. They were not like 20% of the boundaries are similar. The majority of the boundaries were similar to the TACs.
Thanks for the presentation. I was hoping you could expand a bit upon how you created the pseudo trips for the training set, because it seems to me like that has a huge impact on just the network as a whole. So
yes. So
what was the process you took for that?
So we had the demand, the OD demand from the traffic survey. So we generated the network in the ME package, and from the O to D, we have different routes. We assign the demand on the routes, and then we know that the speed of the trips on that route. So then when we have the boundaries of the Antel dataset on the zones there, we generated the distance traveling on that network from each boundaries. So that way we get the distances. So to have those, we also use a 5-minute beat. So that we look at the travel in 5 minutes beat. So in that 5 minutes, if there's no trips, there is no person traveling for that person, and it's 0. But then if there's a trip, we compute the distance traveling on that 5 minutes from the boundary to the point that they reached in 5 minutes, and again from that point to the boundary, for example, and then so this way then we assign those to the zones. We can say that this was the speed for distance travel in that zone for that trace, for that pseudo trace.
Excuse me, maybe I missed something from the beginning of the presentation, but did you have any problem with the kind of ping-pong effect between the towers?
So there are problems with those, but it is, we got the process data. So the Antel telecommunication company, they had their own algorithm to come up with the locations. So they know that and they have a confidence for their locations. So we know their locations from their algorithm. We are not working on that.
2 questions. One, the very end, you said that one potential problem is that everybody doesn't have a cell phone. But in the presentation, you said that there was consistency between the distribution of the Antel traces and consensus. I'm a little surprised there's not stronger bias about who owns phones and where they are. So that's one question. The second one is, I mean, you haven't come up with a very good explanation why your AM peak is so much lower than the other sources. And I'm a little surprised that doesn't create bias for the transit, because you know that you said they were consistent, but you know specifically how many people riding in the AM peak on transit, and the AM peak is the heaviest part of the transit use.
So I'm answering the second question first.
Yeah.
So first, I agree with you for both questions. One thing is we are also over-predicting the transit. So we are under-predicting AM peak, we are over-predicting the transit. So that then, I'm saying that that's why we have similar pattern. Maybe that's one of the reasons. But my comment was that the consistency is across the region. So if we are under predicting the trips, we are not only under predicting for that zone, for the dominant area, or the problem is consistent with the across the region and across time. So the pattern, because I'm not looking at the exact number, I'm looking at the frequency percentage of the traits. So those are similar, but maybe the actual number, if we expand our data set, we are off, but the pattern, the frequency are similar. Right? And I agree with you that I expected that there might be bias for the cell phones. So, for example, rural area don't have the cell phone. But we asked them, and they said that the market penetration of cell phones are very high in Montevideo. But again, it is something that we should consider when we are using cell phone traces, that we should recognize that these traces are only for people with the cell phone.
But it's also not biased across socioeconomic classes.
No, I know, like, that was not the scope of the work to check that, but I don't expect that, because, like, maybe smartphones are, but if we look at the entire cell phone, it might not be.
All right, thank you, Ahmadreza.
Thank you.